around 2008, 2009, difficult time for me, various things going on. And also I attended a course by a colleague at a community school on the work of French scholar Pierre Hadot, who wrote a book called Philosophy as a Way of Life. And I got reading Hadot, and it's just one of those kind of things that can happen in life. You sort of think, oh, I wish I'd read this 15 years ago. This book kind of seems like it's always existed and it was just waiting for me to read. And so I had a really powerful response to that. And so by about 2010, I really started to work on Hadot, and Hadot has a real focus, as many of your listeners will know, on the Stoics. He's written a really wonderful book on Marcus Aurelius. And so Hadot kind of, from about early 70s, became interested in the Stoics, and a lot of his work over the last 4 decades of his life was on the Stoics, but it was centered, as you say, around this conception of philosophy, which I think is kind of what I'd been looking for. I think come to philosophy, like I think a lot of students do, wanting something like wisdom. I couldn't define what it was. I kept looking for it. I became interested in psychoanalysis. I sort of journeyed around a lot of the history of philosophy looking for something. And then I sort of, as I say, I sort of discovered it in Hadot, this sort of different idea of what it is to do philosophy. It's not just about, I guess, building really sophisticated conceptual systems. It's not just about writing really neat papers and kind of being, the genius in your class or whatever it might be in some conceptions. It's something a little bit more existentially compelling, and not necessarily sort of separable from the way that you might want to live. It's not something you just do in a classroom. As a challenge, at least, it might be something you take outside the classroom into your relationships, into your experiences. And I hadn't been something I'd encountered within the academic experience of philosophy. So when I discovered Hadot, it really was like meeting an old friend. And I think a lot of people might have that experience with Hadot because of the way that he writes. But it was the idea of philosophy. And that idea of philosophy is something that is a bit more existentially compelling. It's not just intellectually compelling.
And that's the thing, hey, because I think myself included, when I started to get interested in philosophy, it was really once I kind of understood how the Stoics saw philosophy, because my preconceived ideas of what philosophy were is pretty much, professors focusing most on theory, less on practice, right? And it seemed like a kind of elitist sort of pursuit. And when I understood that the way that the Stoics saw philosophy, which was as a way of life, as a tool to help us to understand how to be an effective human being and how to live a good life, that's when I fell in love with it. I was like, oh my gosh, like everybody should be studying philosophy, and that doesn't necessarily mean they have to read every book on philosophy. It just means they have to be deeply intrigued by the question of how to live a good life and how to be a good human, right? So can you speak to that? Like there are a lot of misconceptions about what philosophy is, and like how did you essentially change the way that you viewed philosophy once you knew that?
Yeah, I can certainly say, from my own experience, it was coming into philosophy looking for something, not finding it, because what I was being given, and this has a legitimacy, was, as you described, this kind of very theoretical activity, learning about great thinkers who produce conceptual systems that are, wonderful works of art, and also, contain deep and profound insight. And then the attitude was, what do you do with it? Well, you write papers, and then you become a professional, and then you write papers for other professionals, and you go to conferences where you speak to other professionals. And for whatever reason, something about that just always struck me as really strange and kind of weird. Not least because conferences are very much about giving papers, and then there's sort of a little bit of feedback time in a very formalized public setting. None of it's very Socratic. None of it's like what you and I are doing right now, for example, asking questions, responding to questions. and in front of a big audience also creates a different and I think somewhat limiting dynamic. So for me, as I say, it was discovering Hadot which really changed that, because you can sort of see it in Plato, you can see it in Aristotle, but it's not something that tends to be emphasised in the way those guys are taught. But what's front and centre in what Hadot identifies, and what's front and centre in the Stoics, is the sense that philosophy is a way of life. It means that it involves exercises, intellectual exercises, but also what Hadot famously calls spiritual exercises, which are attempts to try to say, okay, so now you've got your theory. The theory happens to talk about life. How are you going to bring the two together? Let's not just assume that because you're smart and you can understand this theory that it's necessarily going to do what it's supposed to do, because the theory is there to actually inform your existence. And so Hadot began to read texts with the hypothesis that maybe those guys were trying to do different things. Maybe parts of those texts are the practice of these exercises. So, say Marcus Aurelius, maybe those meditations, as that kind of title suggests, are they're written practices that the guy's undertaken, not to draft some kind of a theoretical treatise, not to come up with original knowledge, not to do this or that, but to try and be a better human being. And the way that philosophy had kind of developed, Hadot commented, it had meant that someone like Marcus had been really kind of screened out of a lot of syllabuses, because philosophers didn't know what to do with that. And Hadot said, well, look, maybe if we change the idea of what philosophy is, we can bring Marcus Aurelius back into the syllabus, because we're just going to admit now that he's doing something different. And maybe philosophy was different back then. And you know what? Even though it's very old, maybe it can be very new. And what he would repeatedly say, both in interviews and important articles, what strikes me as the most exciting is to make old ideas new again. To get people to read old books, but not to read them as old, as historian, which is important. But through reading them with a sense of where they came from, to get a sense of what they might mean today. And that was profound for me, and I think it's been profound for a lot of people. I mean, even in 2007, 2008, for example, when I started getting into this, I went online, and there wasn't a lot on Stoicism online that I could find at that time, because I was interested in practice, meditation and so on. And then I jumped back on about 2013, and things were starting to kind of explode. Then again, about 2016, I kind of retuned back into the whole thing and started kind of subscribing to modern Stoicism and various kind of lists, and it's become huge. And I think it's because people have different ways of coming at the same material. Not everyone's an academic who's dissatisfied with some aspects of academic philosophy, but there's clearly a lot of people out there who are somehow getting access to this material and having a pretty strong instant connection with it. And that's, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, there are a lot of academics who are very skeptical. I can't see that that's a bad thing.
Well, it seems to be a very good thing, right? That making philosophy a lot more accessible to everybody. And I mean, that's the power of what we're doing here, right? It's like, people can listen to this episode while they're doing the dishes, while they're working out, while they're driving the car. There's so many opportunities for people to be learning and growing throughout their day now.